Okay, well, listen, let's start. So, hi, everybody. I'm Stuart, Broadley, CEO of EIC. Delighted to moderate this workshop on supply chain opportunities in downstream decarbonisation. So we're kind of bringing two new aspects to the excellent event yesterday and today, which is supply chain focus and, of course, decarbonisation as a real focus, although I have seen that a little bit yesterday as well. EIC is the UK's largest energy trade association focused on helping supply chain companies across all energy sectors, including downstream, to export and diversify across all energy markets and export around the world. So delighted to welcome our wonderful panel. Welcome, Graeme. Perfect timing. Glad you were able to get in. I know you were having some technical issues.
It's all half on mute. Hold on.
It's okay, no problem. But what we're going to do anyway, so we have Stuart Taylor from Siemens, Graeme Jack from Petrofac, and Enrique Cornejo from British government. But we're going to start with Enrique, who's going to give us a couple of minute overview from a government point of view on this topic, supply chain opportunities in downstream decarbonisation. Then we'll go to Stuart, then we'll go to Graeme, each doing 2 minutes, and then we'll open up the Q&A. So Enrique, over to you.
Thanks, Stuart. Hi, Graeme and Stuart and colleagues joining us in the event. Great pleasure to be here. So yeah, my name is Enrique Cornejo. I work at BEIS, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, part of the British government. I'm working on the industrial decarbonisation strategy as head of technologies. The strategy is going to be published very shortly in the next few weeks, and the strategy is going to be setting the foundations to decarbonize the UK industrial sector.
To share some early insights way ahead of when they're supposed to be, Enrique, that'll be fine. Nobody would know.
It's absolutely, no one's listening. So all I can say is that it's going to be published in the spring, but it's going to be published, very, very soon, I can say. And we think this is going to be really important because we're going to be sort of building on the major announcements that have already been delivered in the Energy White Paper, in the 10-point plan. And overall, I think what I can say with certainty to you all is that, the UK is already a global leader in net zero legislation, but at the same time, we do expect also that there will be very important opportunities for the UK supply chain to get involved in delivering the commitments that have been announced already in terms of our hydrogen production ambition, the amount of CCUS that we're going to see deployed, not only by 2050, but also before, particularly by 2030. And also, I think it's very important to say that, the UK supply chain is very well positioned to make the most of these opportunities. We have a very strong oil and gas sector, as you all know, a lot of relevant skills. But at the same time, we know very well that this transition to a low carbon world is not going to be easy. And it's also going to be costly for industry, for the manufacturing sector as well. So that's why, we're already providing, we believe, quite a lot of support and different commitments that we have announced to actually make sure that this transition is as smooth as possible. So one of the things we've announced, which is relevant for the refining sector, is that we've increased our industrial clusters mission ambition fourfold, which means that now we are expecting to have 4 low carbon industrial clusters in the UK by 2030, and at least a fully net zero cluster by 2040. Of course, this means that we'll have to do a lot of work with the industrial clusters across the UK. You know that the UK has a number of industrial clusters where you have a concentration of sites from the chemical sector, refineries normally anchoring those projects as well, the iron and steel sector, cement sites, and so on. And these clusters, we think, represent a really good opportunity to start deploying decarbonisation technologies at scale, including hydrogen, CCUS, and so on. And we have announced quite a lot of different programs and schemes to support that deployment, which we think is important. So, for example, just for CCUS, which we expect to be a really important part of the decarbonisation puzzle, we have announced that we'll be investing up to £1 billion up to 2025 to facilitate the deployment of these technologies in this clusters and beyond. And in the same case for hydrogen, we also expect to start deploying funding very soon. We have different funding available already, including the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund and other schemes that have actually started to help some of these sites understand and develop plans to use clean hydrogen, to decarbonize their system, their processes, but also to decarbonize the whole of industry. So I can say a bit more about later about some of the specific projects that have been funded. Recently, you will be aware of projects such as Gigastack and HyNet that both incorporate refineries, at their core. But I think also, having worked in oil and gas for many years and with the supply chain and with the EIC and with many of their members, I believe this is a really good opportunity for the whole supply chain to sort of get involved in the transition. And I just finally want to say that we're already, I think, maybe Stuart, brother, you will agree, we're already starting to see the UK supply chain diversify already. I think from one of the latest, I believe it's Oil and Gas UK recently said that more than half of their members have started to diversify into either other sectors or into other, bits of parts of the energy supply chain. So we believe this in the end will surely deliver, growth, jobs, but also at the same time supply chain opportunities. And I think in the refining sector, the UK can definitely become a global leader in using CCUS, using clean hydrogen, and then also hopefully exporting some of those opportunities. So yeah, I'd be keen to get views from others.
Yeah, Enrique, that's great. This. And it's great to know that the government is putting real focus in this area now, and particularly in this clustered approach, which of course is very linked to downstream. So I'm sure we'll want to dig into that a bit more. So that we now have two, of course, major supply chain organizations who are going to give their perspective, and we'll start with Stuart Taylor from Siemens Energy. Stuart.
Hi guys, yeah, my name's Stuart Taylor. Been in oil and gas industry for going on 30 years now. Siemens for 20 of those wonderful years. As Siemens Energy, I mean, we're looking at the downstream sector and the effects of net zero, decarbonisation, but also the effect of what's happening now in the world about the reduction of heavy fuels and the reliance more on lighter fuel grades. What this means now, we can see at the moment some of the refineries we expect to see something like a 25% decrease in the amount of refineries, refining capacity over the world coming in the next few years. Concentration, like we say, on the lighter fuel processes in order to reduce the number of CO2, the amount of CO2 going out into the atmosphere. We also see a change in the fuels. We see downstream becoming the new upstream with the determination and manufacture of hydrogen through SMR processes and ATR processes. We see different ways that downstream needs to get investment across the board, and the only way they can do this is by getting the backing via ESG, environmental and social governance. Now, that's required really to satisfy all the latest shareholders. They need to look at the scope emissions, 1, 2, and 3, what's happening across the board. And now, as Siemens, because I mentioned going across the board and all sorts of processes, that's where we are as a company. Now, we're looking at solution-driven opportunities. Also, we're looking at service capabilities for the readjustment and refinement of the process units, compressors and gas turbines, realignment of gas turbines to burn the hydrogen fuels, looking at our technology about different types of compression to satisfy the requirements of CO2 and hydrogen. And then you're looking at the solutions basis about swapping out what the commercial effects are. There's a big emphasis now on swapping out gas turbines. Everybody thinks gas turbines are bad news. Straight away, we're going to swap out for electrification. Obviously, we don't feel they are bad news. We feel as though there's a place in the market, mechanical drive and power generation. And we're looking at technologies, and we have technologies now to make them efficient, to be able to burn hydrogen, 100% burn hydrogen in the coming years. So again, in terms of the global market, we're looking at solutions across the board. In terms of the UK market, there's a high concentration now on the clusters like the HyNets and the Humberside areas. As Enrique said, some of the largest polluters are the refineries. You've also got the cement works and the glass works. You need to look at across the spectrum. So it's not just oil and gas downstream we need to look at. It's taking into account the scope 2s and scope 3s, looking at the different industries that we're looking at. And so, yeah, for Siemens, it's not a one glove fits all, which I think also fits into what they were saying about the downstream sector yesterday, that this will be done on a sector by sector approach. So with hydrogen burn, or hydrogen production, it is possibility to do a cut and paste approach. But with the downstream decarbonisation, because there's so many different processes in so many different sectors and so many different countries, so much different legislation, then that will be a sector by sector approach. So how are Siemens approaching it? Many different ways, many different avenues, many different thoughts about the future. But we are trying to get there with our EPCs, with our end users, with our sub-suppliers. And the main thing is creating these relationships and these partnerships. We can't do it on our own. I mean, any step change, such as the step change needed in decarbonisation, needs to be done together. So the emphasis for me, for downstream, is working together.
A great way about it. Certainly, there's a role for everybody as well in this market opportunity for supply chain. There's a role for technology. And I know Enrique and his colleagues in the government, various departments actually are looking at how they support, which parts of the supply chain, which parts of the UK need to be leveled up, which technologies need a prop up to get them stimulated and get the market moving. So let's now go. You mentioned, Stuart, then you're working with EPCs and a collaboration. So, of course, delighted to have Graeme Jack from Petrofac. Graeme, over to you.
So good morning. I'm Graeme Jack. I work for ECS, which is the sort of consulting arm, if you will, of Petrofac. So we look at early phase projects, concept feed, less than, not so much the detailed engineering. I think in terms of what we're seeing, I think just to build off what Enrique and Stuart have been saying, I think there's sort of three areas that we've seen sort of recent emphasis on. I think one is flare gas recovery, where it's probably less applicable in downstream processes where you tend to have the sort of unplanned sort of events, sort of large flaring events. So it's less easy to manage it. But for the sort of routine type flaring, there is a role for flare reduction. So we're seeing quite a few sort of inquiries around that, looking at the various technologies. The second area that we're seeing is conversion of fuels to hydrogen, so switching from fuel gas to hydrogen, and how that might be managed, and that would include the production of the hydrogen. So either through SMR or something similar to that. Of course, you still got to find a whole home for the CO2. So the whole cluster argument takes place, and the location of the refinery then becomes important. How do you actually manage that? How do you manage that process? So it's not that simple, but I do think from a downstream perspective, pre-combustion carbon removal is the way to go rather than post-combustion. I think so. We're looking at converting process heaters and so on to hydrogen type fuel. So I think that's an interesting area. And then the third area that we are seeing quite a bit of interest in is really the application of analytics. So using artificial intelligence on sort of two fronts. One is the predictive maintenance. So how you can look at preventing unexpected or unforeseen trips and the results of blowdown and flaring associated with that. And then also, and less in this area, but it's an area that I think is quite interesting, is the overall energy efficiency and the application of artificial intelligence to manage that process. And I see there is actually a talk in 10 minutes or so from Honeywell, a session on that. And I think that would be quite an interesting session to go and attend and try and understand that. So that for me, those are the areas. I think the issue we've got is that, time is short, and trying to put in place things like CO2 recovery or even SMRs and so on starts to become a challenge in terms of the timeline. 2030 is not very far away. So how do we get there? So, we're seeing a lot of people saying, what can we do? What simple steps can we take to try and reduce emissions from various locations? And that includes things like tank vapor recovery and so on. So those are the sorts of things that we're seeing.
Graeme, and I love I'm actually going to follow up with a question in a minute. And as you know, it's a workshop. We don't have too long. We have 10 minutes left. So if I can now, when we go into Q&A, keep the answers, please, as short as we can. But I really liked your point about pre versus post-combustion approach. That's like a fundamental, and I haven't heard it mentioned so simply as why hydrogen versus CCUS or both. And so really a fascinating way. You should design conferences, Graeme. Because you just named a perfect title for a conference, P versus post-combustion. Find out which is the right answer. So with that, Enrique, I'm going to ask you the first question, which is, so it's great to hear that there's so much focus coming up, and obviously we've got COP coming up, COP26 coming up. So what are you doing right now as a government to help these clusters around the UK, which is where in the UK the downstream sectors, of course, are centred because they are the high emission, assets in the UK. What directly are you doing, or do you plan to do, or what can you share about what you're doing to support them? You touched on it a little bit, but it'd be good, I think, just to get right for those cluster point of view.
No, absolutely.
What are you doing? Yeah,
I think the first thing to say is that clusters are very important, but they are not the only focus of what we're doing. Because if you look at the emissions from the UK manufacturing sector, about half of them are inside clusters, and almost the same amount, probably just a bit less than half, are outside of clusters. And if you want to decarbonize all of the manufacturing sector in the UK, you need to target both, right? Of course, the deep decarbonization, technologies, it makes sense to start deploying them in clusters first, because you generate economies of scale. You have, as I said before, anchors for the projects, such as the refineries. You have other sites looking at the potential use of other technologies in the negative emissions space. For example, the use of BECS, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, which a few companies have been looking at. So in terms of the clusters themselves, what we've done in the strategy is sort of map the whole of the UK industrial sector with a new model developed with the Committee for Climate Change and our analysts and a consulting firm. And we know, so what are the types of fuels that are being used in each of the sites, inside clusters and outside, and then we make a series of assumptions of how far we think they are going to be starting, how quickly they will be adopting some of these new technologies, and how they are going to be evolving in their maturity. So we're doing quite a lot of work on the innovation space as well within BEIS to try and understand what are the innovation priorities. And where we need to do more to understand the challenges to retrofit some of these industrial sites. I think the point that Graeme mentioned is a very important one. In some cases, it may well make more sense to do sort of a pre-combustion CCUS. In other cases, post-combustion will make more sense, but depending on what you choose will have implications in terms of retrofit costs as well. So I think at the moment it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, if you like. So we're looking at the use of all of these different mix of technologies and solutions that will enable industry to reach net zero. So we think it's very important also, as Graeme said, the maximizing energy efficiency as well. And we have a number of programs in government that are looking at that, particularly heat recovery in industrial sites. We believe there's still a lot of emissions that can be saved with things such as heat recovery. We're looking at as well at the potential of concepts such as industrial symbiosis. So that will mean, different sites within an industrial cluster or an industrial estate, understanding what are the different energy waste flows between them, and potentially minimizing waste and also reusing some of that energy, that waste, the use of heat networks and so on. And I think, something we've not really discussed a lot about, but I think is important going forward, is the role of resource efficiency and circular economy measures. So I think we tend to focus a lot on the process itself, which is really important. But I think on the consumer side as well, there are a lot of emissions that can be reduced by making a better design of industrial products and making them last longer. The repair and repairability. And also we have a number of programs on the innovation space as well to try and identify what can be done to implement digital technologies to the manufacturing sector to help them reduce emissions and use of things such as digital twins, improving maintenance and so on. So yeah, I think the message is, say, clusters are very important. We're doing a lot of work in them, but at the same time, dispersed sites outside of clusters
also very important.
are also important, and we're looking at ways in which they can maximize.
And I mean, it'd be nice if we could all compete with Elon Musk, wouldn't it? And put up 100 million for every new technology idea. So, but I'm really so Stuart. I'm going to move to you again. Sort of urge a short answer, just because we have only a short time left. So this idea of pre-combustion versus post-combustion is fundamental, of course, to Siemens, I'm sure. What's your approach? Oh, I can't hear you. Can everybody else hear Stuart? No, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now, yes.
Brilliant. 2 lots of mute.
So pre versus post-combustion, what's the Siemens approach?
Well, Siemens approach, I mean, we are not part of a technology for pre or post-combustion anymore. We did look at that back in the days of CO2 reduction for Longana Power Station, or that neck of the woods. But we now concentrate on the machinery in order to transport the CO2. And as I said before, in terms of solutions,
so that would be post-combustion approach. So that would be
yes,
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And so, does that mean you're not planning hydrogen turbine technology, or that's a longer-term play that you're also looking at?
That's a longer-term play. I mean, hydrogen turbine technology for the smaller gas turbines, the industrial range, we're looking at 100% burn. But yeah, for the other technology, we're just not there yet for the requirements.
Yeah, that would be a hell of a financial gamble, I think, to spend a lot of money when the market's not there yet. But
exactly.
you would expect in 10 years' time the market will be there. So I guess from your point of view, it's all about how long it takes to get the technology developed and into market. Would that be right?
Yeah, I mean, once the technology is developed, like it is with the industrial, then it's easily transferred up to the higher range, the big power gen market range. So the technology's there. We're working on getting it across the whole range. We have it on a number of ranges at the moment. So yeah, but the technology is transferable.
Yeah. So Graeme, you and this realistically is the last question, and then I shall release you all back to your day, and you can go back to the stresses of the day instead of this nice relaxing discussion. How to apply AI to optimize and support this whole process? And you mentioned that, I think, you touched on it, but when you look at Petrofac and how you're looking to add value to clients all over the world now that are trying to grapple with where's the best play to start to deal with decarbonisation and with efficiency improvement, as Enrique talked about. The role of AI, you touched on it, but what do you mean by that? And obviously we're in a kind of digital conference here, so I think a lot of people will be interested in. Yeah. How do you see this working?
I think there are a number of people who are developing this, and we alongside others, we actually have we've developed an analytics tool which uses AI to look at specifically on the predictive maintenance and failure of equipment. So where we've applied it now is looking at, for example, compression and being able to predict. We found sort of 10 days in advance you start to pick up some of the signatures that will result in the machine failing, for example. So what we sort of are looking at is how do we, for the broader process, what instruments do we need, what readings do we need to take, and how do we analyze them? So there's 2 steps to this. One is you've got existing plant with existing readings and existing methods of recording that data. Whether the historians are recording the data adequately for this type of thing needs to be thought about. Certainly in the early days of Pi, this was in early 1990s when we first started rolling it out. It was all about storage volumes and the ability to store sufficient data. So going back and training your AI, I think, is important. So we're seeing it focused on equipment at the moment. I would like to see it shift to the energy efficiency, the improving the overall energy efficiency, as you've said. So preheat trains, steam balances, that sort of things, starting to really look at it. Because one thing we've learned from AI is that surprising solutions come out of it, things we haven't thought about. So I think we think about things in a certain way, and we've had certain methods in place for years and years and years. If you apply AI to that, surprising solutions will come out of it. So that's right. The strand I'd like to follow.
I think that's a really brilliant way to segue back to the main stage then, because as you say now, there's Honeywell coming on to talk about their approach with this. And I just want to say thank you so much to the panel today. Really, really interesting. Just a short little injection of new ideas for everybody in this conference. I hope you found this helpful. And for those supply chain companies listening in, seems like there's opportunities everywhere. So how to choose? So with that, I wish everybody a safe rest of the day and see you back at the main stage. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Take care. Stay safe.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.